This is the second in a three-part series on the third declension nouns. It is important that you simply read the textbook and the parts and pay attention to the pages in section 14.1 and learn the vocabulary words in the list at the end of that section. And of course, in your homework for week 6, you are asked to do all of the exercises in exercise 14.1 or E 14.1 as it is as I abbreviate it. I just want to pay attention to the page that is in front of you. I hope it's in front of you because it's hard for me to see with this program exactly what you are seeing, but you should be seeing the slide that shows the basic pattern for the singular nouns that we have learned thus far and we are learning right now. I have placed them beside each other in different colors. Chapters 3 and 4 began our learning of the second declension masculine and neuter. Again, you remember logos and paideon, among many other nouns. We call them second declension because although their nominative and accusative cases are different, the dative case and the genitive case are the same. The endings are the same. And therefore we group them together in a group we call the second declension. And we speak of declining a noun when we mean that a student should give the noun in all the case forms, first in the singular and then in the plural. Logos, logon, logu, logo with the iota subscript, and then the plural logoi, log, log, own, with omega, the genitive plural, and logois, the dative plural. That is how we decline the second declension masculine. And similarly, the second declension neuter, paideon, and then the accusative is paideon. The genitive is paideu, and the dative paideo with the iota subscript. The nominative plural of second declension neuter is paideia, and the accusative is the same, paideia, and so forth. In chapters 6, we came to the first declension feminine nouns, some of them ending in alpha, some of them ending in eta. The article, it should be pointed out, is always the same with the masculine ha, with the neuter ta, and with the feminine he. And then, of course, it takes different forms in the different cases, singular and plural. But the first declension feminine nouns that we learned back in chapter 6, like agape or cardia, heart, or doxa, glory, these nouns are first declension feminine. Even though some end in alpha and take endings in the singular that are more alpha oriented, and on, the accusative as and the dative a with iota subscript. And some are more eta-oriented, like agape, the accusative singular agapein, the genitive singular agapes, the dative singular agape with iota subscript. Their plurals are the same, and therefore we group these in first declension, what we call the first declension nouns. Now in chapter 14, as we mentioned last time in our first segment, we have come to the third declension nouns. And these are somewhat more difficult, but if we follow the mnemonic device to remember sa osi, es as onsen, that is what I've just put down here, this will help us to remember most of them. In many cases, we will need to simply memorize the individual nouns because there are many that simply occur many times in the New Testament. And once we get used to those that occur many times, the ones that occur less, I'm currently reading in the morning in the Epistle to the Hebrews, he uses many Greek words that are only used once in the New Testament. But I can recognize the endings of some of the third declension nouns and adjectives, I should mention, by the way. I can notice them and see them because they are like nouns that I know already. So you have here color-coded the second declension in gold color, the first declension in orange color, and the third declension in yellow color, the singular compared to each other. Now, I'm moving down one slide in the hopes that you will see this on your your recording, your video recording. I have not placed the plural beside each other. I'll let you do that. But again, the mnemonic device, es as onsen, is to help us remember the endings of the plural declension, third declension nouns. If we move down one slide, we have four nouns taken from chapter 14 from our vocabulary in section 1, and you will notice how the author, or how helpful, let's put it this way, how helpful it is to have this little device, sa osi es as onsen, when we compare the different nouns with each other. Elpis, you have sigma, sa, and notice the alpha, osi, sa osi, and the plural, es as on sin. The movable nu comes into place when the next word starts with a vowel. This was helpful in the first century when the first manuscripts were written because there was no space between words. So when a word ended with a vowel and the next word might start with a vowel, there might be some confusion. If, for example, you have iota and the next word starts with alpha, it might look like an ia, or especially if the next word started with epsilon, then it might look like a diphthong. So to avoid that confusion, they used what we call now a movable nu. in those cases. But in many cases, you do not have that movable nu. But in general, the mnemonic device, sa, os, si, notice Omicron, sa, os, si, es, as, un, sin, helps us to remember the endings of third declension nouns. The same with the word for grace, charis. But notice we have an exception here, because the accusative we would expect to be actually chareta, because this vowel, this consonant is a tau, chareta, and actually there are two occurrences of the accusative singular as chareta, grace, as a direct object in the New Testament, but usually it is the exception, charen. So there will be exceptions with words. Once we get used to that fact, when we see other exceptions, then they are not so surprising. I know it is difficult now, but learning a language is just often getting used to patterns. And once we get used to patterns, when we see them again, we recognize them. Otherwise, we have sa, we don't have the a, but we have o, si, es, as, on, sen, also with this word, charis, grace. Graces, the plural, will not occur very often. Grace, charis, is mostly appears of course, in the singular. Now, there are some words like pous, but again, the word for foot follows sa, os, si, es, as, on, sin, but there is a little bit of difference that we want to talk about in our third lesson with regarding to the key consonant of the third declension nouns. And by the way, if against my hope and expectation, you are not seeing the slides in the presentation, I am sending you a copy of the presentation as a PDF, so you should be able to look at the pages of the PDF and see those slides. When we come to a word like on air or on air, a man, usually a male or a husband. This word is very definitely masculine. The word anthropos is almost always gender neutral. It could be a person or a human being, as we've said before, but aner is a man or a husband. It is definitely male. And the opposite, as it were, or the complement, we should say, of gune, wife or woman. Aner, husband, gune, wife or woman. Husband or man, wife or woman. Now, gune is first declension, eta noun, but aner is a third declension noun. And we must be careful that we know that. The thing I would want to point out here is that the vocative is different with these words that end in er, mater, mother, aner, husband or man. Notice the vocative changes from eta to epsilon when we address, when a woman addresses her husband, for example. Aner, it becomes, instead of aner. And mater, if we address mother, if we address her as mother, mater instead of mater. So the eta becomes epsilon. Then mothers, metere is also different. For the first time, we have a difference in the vocative plural, and we have not had that before. But these are small things. The vocative otherwise occurs not very often in the New Testament. As we look at other words that appear in the section 14.1 that are part of your vocabulary, I'm sorry, I've made a mistake, gune. This is a mistake that I've made since I was a student. Gune is not a first declension noun, as I just said. Instead, it is also a third declension noun. And I'm always forgetting that. I should not forget it because the plural, or the key consonant, I should say, the key consonant is kappa. So, for example, the plural of gune, wife or woman, gunaikes. Gunaikes. Gunaikes means women. And the vocative is the same, gunaikes, addressing women, from which we get the word, of course, gynecology. And maybe you know that a gynecologist is a doctor who helps women, who addresses problems that women, physical problems that women have. I suppose an oneologist, I've never, no, sorry, what was that previous slide? My mistake. An andrologist, here with the word aner, andres, an andrologist would be a man who would be a doctor who addresses problems that men have, although I have never heard of an andrologist. But perhaps they do exist. Going back to our slides, the next to the last slide in this presentation has the words pater, father, and cher, the word for hand. Notice there are some differences. We don't have the sigma at the beginning, and that's why we, as the ending. Remember, sa ossi es as onsin, sa ossi. We have ossi, and we have es as onsin, but we don't have sa, the sigma at the beginning. Instead of we have pater and the vocative pater. Pater and pater, sorry. Pater and pater in the vocative. For the word for father. So that's why we put sigma in brackets, because these words don't end in sigma. But in general, again, the mnemonic device, sa ossi es as onsin, helps us to remember the endings. So the word for father, the word for hand, ends in ro, but otherwise follows again the same pattern. Again, if you memorize your vocabulary well, and then you memorize the endings for these words, and notice the similarities, that the differences really occur in the nominative case, and particularly in the nominative singular with masculine and feminine nouns in the third declension, you will not have any trouble with this section 14.1. But let me again admonish you to learn well these chapters now, because the chapters in Greek 2 are a little bit more of a challenge than we had in Greek 1, but they are key a key part of our foundation that we will need in Greek 3 and 4 when we really get down to translation of the New Testament. I will have one more short section and look at some pages in the textbook before, as we conclude this section on third declension nouns.